3 days. That is how long Shaquille O'Neal spent working the 6 a.m. shift on the floor of a distribution warehouse in Atlanta, Georgia, in a standard-issue orange safety vest, a hard hat pulled low, and a pair of safety glasses that sat slightly crooked on his face and would have made any of his former teammates laugh. His badge said Ray. A number. No last name. The same laminated card every temp worker collected from the staffing desk on their first morning. Nobody on the floor looked at it twice. Nobody looked at him twice. Or more precisely, they looked at his size, registered it as belonging to someone who had probably played football somewhere and gotten hurt, and kept moving. 4 championships, a business portfolio spanning real estate, entertainment, food franchises, and workforce investment that had been compounding for 2 decades. A net worth north of $400 million. None of it visible. None of it meant to be. He operated a pallet jack in Bay 7. He logged intake shipments on a handheld scanner. He ate lunch at the long table in the break room at 12:15. On the afternoon of day 3, the floor manager walked onto the main floor and did the specific thing that Shaquille O'Neal had driven to Atlanta, collected a temp badge, and clocked in at 6 a.m. for 3 consecutive mornings in order to see. He saw it. He set his scanner down on the shelf beside him very carefully, with the deliberateness of a man making a decision. And he waited. He had been collecting details since the first morning the way he collected everything, quietly, without reaction, without letting the collection show on his face. The first thing he noticed on day 1 was the ID badge hanging from the vest of the worker in Bay 5, 2 stations down, a man in his early 30s who moved with the measured, efficient precision of someone who has spent time learning to make his body as small a problem as possible. The badge said Andre W. Below the name, in smaller type, Initiative Employee, Month 8. He noticed it and kept moving. The second thing he noticed, later that morning, was that tucked between Andre's ID badge and the vest itself was something else, a folded piece of paper, or a photograph, pressed flat, private. When Andre lifted a heavy box and his vest shifted, it shifted too. Shaq saw just the corner of it. He could not see what it was. He filed it and kept moving. The third thing was in the break room on day 2. A row of metal lockers along the far wall, each one personalized in small ways that the company rulebook probably did not technically permit. Andre's was the second from the left on the bottom row. On the door, partly covered by the official label, was a sticker, a cartoon basketball. Blue. The kind that comes in a sheet of 20 from a dollar store and a child picks out carefully. Not new. Faded at the edges, curling at one corner. Placed there by someone who wanted it to stay. He looked at it for the time it took to fill a water bottle. He said nothing. He kept moving. Now here is the part that nobody in that warehouse understood across any of those 3 days. Not the floor manager, who had seen the large temp in Bay 7 and filed him as a forklift capacity consideration, and nothing more. Not the 55-year-old veteran at the far end of the floor, who had decided by day 2 that Ray was the right kind of quiet, and had started saving him the seat at the end of the lunch table. Not Andre Washington in Bay 5. 8 months in, never late, not one missed shift. Who had not looked directly at the man in Bay 7, because Andre had spent 8 months not looking directly at anything he did not need to look at, keeping his head down, doing the work, not giving anyone a reason to notice him in any direction. What Shaquille O'Neal had known before he walked through those loading doors on day 1, before he logged his first intake shipment, before the estimate came back, before any of this, was one specific fact about this building, and the man in Bay 5 that would rewrite the meaning of everything that was about to happen. He He had been carrying that fact long before he applied for the temp badge, and what the floor manager, Gary Pruitt, had absolutely no idea about, standing at the edge of Bay 5 on the afternoon of Day 3 with a write-up form already half filled on his clipboard, was who was standing 7 bays away, watching him. Stay with us for the entire video. What unfolds in this warehouse does not just change the people inside it. It finishes something that started a very long time ago, in a city that is nowhere near Atlanta. Shaquille Rashawn O'Neal was born in Newark, New Jersey, in March of 1972, in a neighborhood that did not announce its difficulty. It simply was. The way weather is, the way gravity is, a condition you are born into, rather than a place you travel to. His mother, Lucille O'Neal, was 20 years old and already the most unshakable person in any room she entered, not because she performed strength, but because she had organized her entire life around it so completely that it had become her structure. Invisible, load-bearing, not negotiable. She raised him with a sentence she repeated so many times it crossed from language into climate. We don't beg, and we don't brag. We work, and we trust God, and we keep it between us and Him. He heard it at breakfast. He heard it after losses and after championships, and after his name was printed in newspapers in 14 countries. She never stopped saying it. He never stopped hearing it. His father, Philip Harrison, was a U.S. Army sergeant whose instruction ran shorter. Don't be a reaction. Be a response. He said it when Shaq was cut from a team, when he failed a test, when someone made a remark at school about the block he came from. Between those two sentences, Shaquille O'Neal grew up understanding something that most men spend decades finding. That character is only real in the version that operates when no one is watching. He carried that through LSU, through the draft, through the business career that followed. He gave to foundations and communities and individuals without making announcements about it. Because Lucille O'Neal had been very specific on the subject of announcements, they were, in her view, the least interesting part of any work worth doing. But the program, the Second Chance Workforce Initiative, the network of training facilities and distribution centers and re-entry employment pipelines he had been building and funding for 9 years. That program had a specific origin. It had a face. His name was Jerome Washington. Jerome grew up 4 blocks from Shaq's apartment in Newark. They met at 12 on a court with a bent rim and no net, and stayed close through high school the way boys stay close when the neighborhood they share becomes a thing they are both trying to outrun. Jerome was fast. Jerome was funny. Jerome had a way of walking into a room and reorganizing its energy without any apparent effort. He was also, at 19, in the wrong car with the wrong people on the wrong night. And he served 6 years. And he came out at 25 into a world that had already decided what kind of person he was. For 6 years after that, Jerome applied to jobs. He was qualified for most of them. He did not get most of them. A background check, a box on a form, a hiring manager who had already arrived at the decision before the interview started. It happened the same way at different companies, enough times that Jerome stopped counting and started saying the same sentence whenever Shaq asked how it was going. Nobody gives you a second look after prison. They just wait for you to fail. Shaq heard that sentence in person, and he heard it on the phone, in the last conversation he had with Jerome Washington, 2 months before Jerome died at 31 of an overdose during the worst years of the opioid crisis in Newark. Shaq received the call on a Tuesday morning. He sat with it for a long time. He did not make a statement. He called his foundation director and said, "I want to build something. I want it to hire the people nobody else will hire. I want to pay them properly and give them a real path forward. and I do not want my name on the front door. Jerome Washington's name is on the founding documents. It is on the mission statement. It is on the first page of the program charter. Jerome has been gone for 9 years. He is not in this warehouse today. But he is everywhere in it. In the orange vest, in the laminated badge, in the 6am shift, and the path it offers. You will hear his name one more time before this video ends. And when you do, you will understand exactly why Shaquille O'Neal drove to Atlanta and clocked in at 6am for 3 consecutive days and said nothing to anyone. Gary Pruitt was 51 years old and had been a warehouse floor manager for 19 years, which meant he had spent 19 years being held responsible for outcomes he did not fully control, in facilities where the distance between a solid quarter and a terminated contract was often one failed metric. He grew up in Youngstown, Ohio. In a city that had taught him early that what you have can be taken, he had watched it taken from his father, who worked a steel plant for 22 years and was laid off at 54 and spent the decade after that in a diminishment Gary could not name exactly, but recognized as a man deciding that the things he had planned on were not going to arrive. Gary had made himself the kind of manager whose facility did not have bad metrics. Meticulous, present, the person his employers called when something needed to run clean. When the company was contracted to operate this second chance facility in Atlanta, they had not wanted their regular senior managers anywhere near the liability exposure of a workforce program with formerly incarcerated workers. They brought in Gary Pruitt because his numbers were tight and his documentation was airtight. Gary took the job because it paid $11,000 more than his previous position, and his daughter was starting college in the fall, and he had done the math that parents do when the number on the tuition bill does not match the number in the checking account. He did not believe in the program. He had never believed in it. He had told his wife on the drive home that programs like this were built for press releases. He had been waiting for 16 months for it to fail in a way he could document cleanly. For 16 months it had not failed. The workers were not perfect. They were human. They had hard days. They made errors, but they came in. They worked. They had reasons to work that Gary Pruitt had never taken the time to ask about. Because he was not looking for reasons. He was looking for the failure he had written into his expectations before the first shift started. On day 3, standing at Bay 5 with a clipboard and a form that was already half filled before he reached the station, he reached for the failure, and he found it. He stopped in front of Andre Washington. He read the write-up aloud. Then he said, loud enough for the floor to hear, "People like you always find a way to make this harder than it has to be. This is exactly why companies stop taking chances on people like you." He clipped the form to his board. "That's your 3rd write-up. One more and you're done." He turned to leave. He had said the words before he fully decided to say them. The moment they left his mouth, something in him already knew. Andre Washington had been at his station in Bay 5 since 5:58 am. 8 months and 3 days. Not once late. Not one missed shift. 2 errors in 8 months. A mislabeled pallet in February, a scanner misread in June, both caught and corrected. Both logged without escalation. He did not extend himself socially, not because he was unfriendly, but because he had learned, in a place that rewarded predictability and punished visibility, to be precise about how much of himself he offered in any direction. He came in. He worked. He ate at the same table. He went home. He had been clean for 4 years. He had a daughter who was 7, and he picked her up from school on Thursdays, which was the one afternoon his shift ended early enough for him to be the person waiting at the gate. He did not talk about this at work. He touched the photograph behind his badge when the day was long and kept moving. In the bay across the floor, 24-year-old Luz Cardenas ran her station at a throughput rate that had ranked in the top 3 on the floor's weekly reports for 3 consecutive months, a fact Gary Pruitt had logged without comment. She had been in the program for 3 months. She had a custody hearing on the 14th and had asked twice for a 45-minute shift adjustment and been told twice that 2 weeks' notice was required. She had found someone to cover the school drop-off and had not raised the subject again. Mel, at the far end of the floor, was the steady gravitational center of the shift, the one who knew where the working scanner was, which bay had the faulty lift, and how to read a new hire on their first day without making them feel red. 6 months in, 2 tours behind him, a service record that most resume screeners had never learned to translate. He had eaten lunch next to Ray for 3 days and decided that Ray was a man who listened more than he talked, which Mel had long ago concluded was the correct ratio. At the 4th bay from the entrance, a 19-year-old named Darius was 12 days in. New enough that his vest still smelled like the storage room, and he was still figuring out the scanner. He was the one who watched the large man in Bay 7 set down his scanner and begin to walk across the floor and said, very quietly, to no one in particular, "Oh." Just that one word, soft and low. He had grown up watching a certain kind of game. Shaq walked slowly, not with urgency. But on a warehouse floor where every movement has a stated purpose, a very large man crossing 7 bays with no scanner and no pallet generates a specific kind of quiet in front of him, a quiet that moves ahead of the person, clearing space before they arrive. Heads turned. Luz stopped her count. Mel set a box down. Gary Pruitt, 6 feet from Bay 5, clipboard in hand, turning to note something, heard the change in the floor's texture, and looked up. He watched the man in the orange vest approach, and something shifted behind his face. Not recognition, not yet. But the calculation he was running had a new variable, and he did not have a category for it. The man stopped directly between Gary Pruitt and Andre Washington's station. "I'll sign for whatever you want to write up," he said. Flat, quiet, 1 sentence. "But it goes on my record, not his." Gary Pruitt looked at him for a moment, with the expression of a man who has run a floor without incident for 16 months and is not going to have that record disrupted by a temp who has been here for 3 days. "Sir, this doesn't involve you. Back to your station." The man did not move. "I can't do that." Gary's jaw tightened. Something moved behind his eyes that was not quite certainty and not quite its absence, but lived uncomfortably between them. "I'm going to write you up too. You can take it to HR." Shaq looked at him steadily. "That would be great," he said. "Let's go right now. And here is where you are going to have to wait just a little longer, because before you see what happened when Gary Pruitt walked into the HR director's office, before you see the specific moment his face changed for the final time, you need to understand that the HR director had been in the building for 43 minutes already. A call had been placed to her direct line at 10:15 that morning from a number she did not recognize. The person on the other end had asked, very quietly, for 30 minutes of her afternoon. She had said yes. She had the folder on her desk. She was waiting. The floor had gone completely still. The ceiling fans turned. The scanner in Luz's hand beeped once, unanswered, and went silent. Cynthia Park had worked in human resources for 22 years and had the specific composure of someone who has spent 2 decades in rooms where people are learning things they were not prepared for, and who has understood that her job in those rooms is simply to be very still. She was still. The folder on her desk contained one document: the parent company's ownership and organizational chart, with the principal stakeholder listed at the top of the first page. Gary Pruitt sat across from her. The temp in the orange vest sat at the end of the table. Gary had the expression of a man cataloging his defenses. Whatever this employee has raised through unofficial channels, I want to be clear that the write-up issued today was fully within documented policy and my record of. Cynthia slid the folder across the desk without speaking. Gary opened it. He found the first page. He read the name at the top of the organizational chart. He looked up. The man at the end of the table reached up and removed the hard hat. Then the safety glasses. He placed them on the table beside each other, deliberately, without performance, one after the other. Gary Pruitt looked at him for a long time. Something moved behind his face. Not shame and not panic, but occupying the space between them so fully there was no room for anything else. "I have been on that floor for 3 days," Shaq said. He had a printed file on his side of the table, pulled from HR at 10:15 that morning. He opened it. 41 write-ups in 16 months, 29 issued to initiative employees. 11 of those materially damaged the employee's path to permanent hire status. 2 of those employees left the program because of what went on that paper. He put the file down. He looked at Gary Pruitt evenly. "You are not being terminated. You are being reassigned. Starting Monday, you will complete the full second chance certification training, 6 weeks, paid, full salary. You will sit in a room with people you have been writing up, and you will learn something. When you come back, if you come back, it will be with a different methodology." He reached into the front pocket of the vest and set an envelope on the table. He did not slide it. He placed it. "Your daughter is at Kennesaw State," he said. "A statement. There is information in there about the Foundation's education grant program. Have her apply. That part is not connected to your employment, and it is not conditional on anything. It is just right." Gary Pruitt picked up the envelope with hands that were not entirely steady. Shaq stood. He looked at Cynthia Park. "I want Andre Washington in this office before end of shift. I want Luz Cardenas's schedule adjusted for the 14th immediately, retroactive apology in writing from this office. And Mel," he said Mel's last name, which he had learned over 3 days of lunch. "He is already training the new hires informally. Make it his official role and pay him accordingly." He picked up the hard hat. He picked up the safety glasses. He walked to the door. Philip Harrison had been right, a long time ago, in a Newark apartment, and his instruction was in this room the way it was always in every room where Shaquille O'Neal made a decision in stillness instead of in heat. Don't be a reaction. Be a response. This had been the response. It had clocked in at 6 a.m. and said very little for 3 days, and waited for exactly the right moment. Cynthia Park placed Andre Washington's employment file on the table 30 minutes later and left the room so that Shaq and Andre could speak privately. And it was in those first minutes, before Shaq had said anything about the write-up, before he had said anything about the promotion he was offering, before he had fully explained who he was or why a man with a hard hat and a Ray badge had just stood between him and a write-up, that his eyes moved across the standard intake section of the file. Employment date, program enrollment, personal information, emergency contact. He read the name. He stopped. He was not talking when he stopped. He had not yet started, but the silence that arrived was a different quality of silence, specific, the kind that forms around a word that is too large to take in at full size on the first pass. The name in the emergency contact field was Jerome Washington, listed as deceased, listed as the employee's brother. Shaq picked up the file. He read the name again, not because he had misread it, but because that is what the mind does when the word is too significant to absorb at once. It goes back, double-checks, asks the page to confirm. Jerome Washington. Deceased, Andre Washington's older brother, the man who had told Shaq, in their last conversation on a Tuesday morning 9 years ago, that nobody gives you a second look after prison. The man for whom this program, this warehouse, these 6 AM shifts and second-chance laminated badges, for whom all of it had been built and named and funded and kept quiet. Andre had found his way here without knowing who built it. He had applied through a website. No referral, no connection listed. His own name, and nobody else's. He had shown up for 8 months without one late day. Without one person in this building knowing that the reason the building existed was his brother. He had been carrying Jerome with him every single day, in the photograph behind the badge, in the basketball sticker on the locker door, in the tattoo on his forearm that Shaq had noticed on day 1 and filed. He had been carrying Jerome into a building that Jerome, in the last and most specific way available to a man who was no longer living, had built. Shaq set the file down. He did not speak for a moment. Andre Washington sat across from him with the careful watchfulness of someone who has spent 8 months reading rooms for what they are about to require. Shaq said, "Your brother's name is on the first page of this program's founding documents. The mission statement. It has been there since the beginning." He was quiet for a moment. "Then, he sent you here. He just sent you the long way." Luz Cardenas made it to her custody hearing on the 14th with 40 minutes to spare. She got the ruling she needed. Mel's title was updated in the HR system by end of that week, with a salary that finally matched the work he had been performing without acknowledgement for 6 months. A 19-year-old named Darius, 12 days in and still learning the scanner, watched all of it unfold from Bay 4 and clocked in the next morning 7 minutes early for the first time, and did not mention it to anyone. Gary Pruitt started the certification program on a Monday, sat in the front row, and did not speak for the first 40 minutes of the first session, which, for a man who had spent 19 years speaking first, was already a different posture. A floor manager who had spent 16 months cataloging failures learned, in a classroom in Atlanta, that the people he had been cataloging had never been planning to fail. They had been planning to stay. And Andre Washington accepted a supervisory role in the program he had entered, as an applicant, not as a gesture, not as charity, but because 8 months and 3 days of data said he already knew how to do the job, had already been doing it informally for every new hire who needed to know which scanner worked and which bay ran slow, and how to make the shift feel survivable when the day was long. He accepted. He called his daughter. Then he took the photograph out from behind his badge and held it for a moment, and put it in his shirt pocket instead. Not hidden, not tucked away, just carried. Jerome had already sent someone. Drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from tonight. We want to know. If this story stayed with you, leave a like, because this is the kind of thing that gets buried on this platform, and it should not. Subscribe to this channel, and you are joining a community that looks for the stories that almost got missed. Our next video is going somewhere you are not going to be ready for. We will see you there.